All right. Good morning. It is, guys, what's today's date? It is December.
December 16th.
It's my birthday. Hey, happy birthday to me. And we're doing another video talk, business talk. We have a special guest with us this morning. And we canceled on you last time. So we have a big apology to Michelle because we rescheduled to today. But it's even a more special day. So I want to welcome everybody to our discussions, Business Talk After Hours. And today we are going to talk about the things that Michelle does, really mental health and mental health in the workplace and all the kind of things we're going through, because I think it's even more apropos now than it was like a month ago when we were supposed to talk, because now the vaccine's coming out and we're hitting the holiday time and things are spiking and there's a lot of real angst and anxiety going on. So everybody knows I'm Mitch Beinhacker. I'm an attorney in Clark, New Jersey, doing this from my home. So if I do have to drop off because the dogs are barking, I'll jump on mute while we're taping this live. And I work with small business owners and entrepreneurs and startups and family-owned businesses and everything throughout the state of New Jersey, and do some federal tax planning national. My co-hosts are Trevor Anderson and Mike Manella. Trevor, if you want to introduce yourself, and then Mike, then we'll get Michelle talking and we'll have a good 45 minutes to an hour discussion.
Yeah, well, thanks again. And Michelle, thanks for coming out. So I'm Trevor Anderson. I own TRJ Consulting Services. We're a fractional CFO, COO firm that specializes in startups, small businesses, family-owned businesses, and lower middle market companies. And really a lot of value to add to what we do is really kind of drive institutional and positive results.
Good morning, everyone. Michael Manella, Wealth Advisor, Merrill Lynch. Michelle, thank you for being here with us today. Definitely looking forward to the dialogue. My business is wealth management, help clients plan for life transitions financially, help them prepare for and through those overall transitions, based out of Red Bank, New Jersey.
So Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself and give us your background, but we go back, what, 7 or 8 years, I think we've known each other, right?
Do.
So Michelle and I met when I was running an entrepreneurs academy for middle school and high school kids, and we needed business mentors, and a co-friend of ours, a mutual friend, brought Michelle in, and she did it for several years, helping all the business. She was great. So now I'm excited to talk about all the stuff she's doing. So Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and we'll talk about mental health in the workplace.
Well, thank you, Mitch, Michael, and Trevor for having me. It's an honor to be here with you all. So I live in Westfield. I have a small company called Trifecta Mental Health, where what I'm up to is really creating compassion and understanding about people with invisible disabilities in the workplace. That's what I'm doing. I do that because I am deeply connected to mental health personally. I grew up with a mother who had bipolar disorder and cared for her. And then a few years ago, I was diagnosed with depression. So I know what that feels like as well. And I created my company after completing 19 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I had gotten deeply connected to this work through my TED Talk, through my published memoir, and I knew what it felt like to be met with a leader who was not compassionate to me when I dealt with my own depression. And I thought to myself, how many other people are dealing with this? And I can make a difference in shifting the culture so people feel accepted and not discriminated against, and just understood that people with a mental illness are not any less than anyone else. So that's why I do what I do, and thrilled to talk to you guys today.
So Michelle, what's going on in the world now? Because I know normally you would go on site to a company, whether they got 100 employees or 1,000 employees, and you would interact with them either in a group or person, whatever, and bring all those resources out. So
Yeah.
what are you doing now? How are you doing it? I mean, we're all stressed out and anxious about everything anyway.
I know.
So yeah.
I know. And, we have so many people working from home. They're remote working. They're wearing the hat of the parent and the homeschool teacher, and the employee. So a lot of people are working remotely. And the way I've been able to serve my clients during this time is through my resilience program, because there's nothing more challenging than an employee who is not feeling empowered and therefore they're not engaged. So I've been sort of meeting the needs of what my clients wanted. And they said, help us have our people feel like they're able to do things to keep themselves grounded during this time. So my resilience program has been one of the ways I've been doing that. I just launched a mental health assessment because a lot of employers truly do not know how their people are doing, right? They have employee assistance lines that they hope their employees are using, but if you do the research, you'll recognize so many EAPs go underutilized because people just are not comfortable. They're afraid, they're embarrassed, they think their company's going to find out. So there's some work to be done around really helping leaders understand how their people are faring during this. So that's also something I'm offering, is to just give them some insight into how their people are doing.
What kind of things are you seeing? Like what issues are people
Yeah.
facing and dealing with?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it's the uncertainty, right? I one of the things I preach in my resilience webinar is turn off the news, right? A lot of people they're home, they're in front of their television. That's causing fear, that's causing anxiousness. Unfortunately, relationships are struggling because of it. Kids are being homeschooled, so there's like elevated stress, anxiety, everything you can think of about being in a quarantine for 9 months now is really, it's compromising people. But yet a lot of people are not speaking up. Like, I had a friend of mine say, oh, I check in with my people all the time and they say they're fine. It's really getting underneath the fine and say, like, what does that really mean? It's really being curious. It's really about building trust and building rapport, because people are not going to be, very upfront about the fact that they're struggling. So we need to realize the fine might not be fine.
Michelle, I have a question. So as I've always kind of coin marked a term of my career as a working leader, where I try to, stay within my own humbleness and really kind of understand what's going on with inside a team. Now, I've been out of the corporate world for a little bit, but what do you see as a kind of a sign to kind of help things and leaders in companies today? So, I have a large team that's probably all virtual for the most part.
Yeah.
Where does that kind of seesaw mechanism where I'm really kind of being attentive to the needs of them, but also I'm providing the guidance and being a leader at an organization? Because it's almost like that friend versus your colleague versus your boss. That's kind of like what I'm curious a little bit more about.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about connection, and it's all about, you're right. You have to maintain the deliverables, the expectations. But listen, people, I think when I reflect on my career and I think about those leaders who were connected to me, who really checked in on me, who really were attuned to me, those were the circumstances where I worked my butt off. So I think that leaders have a role to be genuine and be authentic and connect with people and meet them where they are. You're going to get more out of them. I think naturally you're going to get more out of an employee who feels like, man, my boss really cares about me. He really genuinely wants to know, like, how I'm doing, how I'm faring. So I think you'll get more by just being more connected and authentic.
Are people like
So
afraid though? They'll, like if you're open and honest about what, like, you appear weak, the
I
other
know.
employees are faring fine, let's say. Maybe they're not, but they're not admitting it.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
team leader's like, well, Mike and Trevor are really hitting the gun and Mitch is having problems, or what,
Yeah.
they're right. They're afraid of, like, and Mike, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm sure you're going to say similar things. It's a
Yeah, I was just
catch-22.
going to say too. I mean, I think this is just immensely topical right now because first and foremost, there's issues, without a pandemic. You throw the pandemic in the mix, and it's even intensified even more. So I see that your service is just, I mean, it's invaluable at all times, but especially now, due to that, there's probably even there's just a ton more anxiety that's kind of out there right now. So I guess the question, that I have is that as you come in, right, and you have people for the most part working from home,
Yeah.
there's no interaction physically in
I
person,
know.
with people. So, and again, this is probably a challenge even when they are together, but how do you go about, providing that education and kind of engaging that, right? Because to your point, a lot of people might say, oh, I'm just fine. And the reality is, how many people are just saying that they're fine, but they're not really fine? They have things going on because they're maybe too afraid to basically say, "Hey, I need help," because how am I going to be looked at, from my position, and going forward, and my performance reviews and everything else, right? So many different things are going through their mind. So how do you go about engaging, these employees, right? Especially too if they're at home, right?
Yeah.
On their own.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, no one wants to be singled out and feel uncomfortable, like they're being, under the light. Like, are you really
Yep.
okay? Like, you can't really do that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's up to a leader to build trust and rapport, long before the pandemic. So, I mean, trust and rapport is everything. But the way I sort of like level the field is through the assessment. I'll do the it's anonymous, 100% anonymous assessment, collect that data. And in the beginning of the resilience webinar, I basically show them, hey, this is how you're all doing. And isn't it funny that 3/4 of you are all struggling in these areas, but yet no one's talking about it? And
Yep.
so I don't expect them to all chime in the webinar and talk about their well-being, but it normalizes that they're all sort of in the same boat, even though they're not talking about it. And that
Yep.
starts us off on a whole other kind of conversation that, you know what, I bet if you maybe were talking to a peer and you realize that, like, the majority of your whole division is struggling, you can laugh about it and sort of make light of it, and sort of it becomes natural that, look, you saw the assessment, we're all kind of in the same boat, and then there's more camaraderie. So my goal is to really help reflect back that they're all really in this together and they're all feeling similarly, and believe it or not, leaning on one another might not be a bad thing.
Mhm. Yep.
I,
Now, from that point, sorry, Mitch.
no,
From
go
that
ahead.
point, yeah, what are the next steps from there, right? So, say you have this data, you're
Yeah.
coming front and center. 70% of you are kind of struggling in the same areas. What are the next steps to kind of engage them or getting them engaged? Is it
Yeah.
more of messaging saying, "Listen, it's okay. This is not going to be held against you. We're here to help, right? There's a resource here. Obviously, we're not forcing you to the resource, but it
Right.
is here." Whether it's today, tomorrow, next month, whatever it be, we're here for you, right? And this is not going to be counted against you. What are kind of the next steps from that point?
Yeah, so you're looking at it so it's like almost black and white, but it's really not. So I start off the whole resilience program by sharing that data, and then I go into things that people can do for themselves, right? What is the
Yep.
DIY to help me feeling better?
Mhm.
And then they have practices they can weave into their routine. It's not necessarily about you're mentally ill or mentally sick. So one
Yep.
of the things I emphasize is like the mental health can it is really a continuum. And so if we stop relating to it as you're either well or sick, then there's this freedom to just be a human being.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is get people comfortable with, okay, so maybe you're down here on the scale, but you need to acknowledge how you're feeling. I give them DIY tools, right? Like, these are things you can do. But the most important part of my resilience program is getting people comfortable with acknowledging that they're not okay, and resources to go and get support before they hit a crisis. Like, the biggest financial challenge is when employees hit crisis, then they're out on disability, right? Or they're disengaged because they're about to hit crisis. So my goal is to bridge them to have a healthy relationship to their brain and ultimately know where to go. Now, they can go to internal resources, but if they don't feel like they're comfortable doing that, I give them a whole host of other resources they can go to talk and
Right.
to start to get support.
It's so important because I think that as providers, workers, members of a team, whatever, we feel like we got to put that all on ourselves, Going to people shows weakness, and that's why a lot of times we wait till there's a major crisis where we don't have a choice anymore,
Yeah.
and especially as we're all kind of solo people. Who do we go to? I mean, we don't have to, you go to friends, you talk to people that you can confide in. But I think that a lot of it is like, we talked about this, I think, when you and I were on your video discussion about leadership. A lot of it's awareness, like just being aware of these resources and understanding that they're out there,
Yeah.
and making sure that, what, I don't have to carry the whole world on my shoulders. Like, nobody's
Yeah.
expecting you to. And a lot of people, a lot of us feel like they are, that we're, that we have to be the
Yeah.
ones to suck it up. And that's how we were raised from generation to generation. And now, I mean, look at my kids, right? So my son's in college, my daughters are in high school. Mental health and awareness. I mean, first of all, they have a lot more awareness about it, right? but they also have a lot more of mental health issues
Yeah.
because they're like lost in the world and all these different, and that was when it was normal, like Mike said. Now we're off the rails with the way the world is working, you know?
And
So-
and I want to be the one to be here with your audience and with the people that I interact with and give you permission to not be okay and give yourself grace. We are living through a pandemic.
Right.
Like
That's
if,
no
if
joke.
ever there's a time to give yourself grace, now is the time to give yourself grace and recognize that maybe you don't have to shoulder it by yourself. Maybe if you just got support, you could just get through it. You know? And I think people just feel like I gotta power through. I gotta like, suck it up. It's like, no, this is hard.
Right. Yeah. So what kind of, what do I do? I'm an employee, whatever, and I'm struggling with these things. And what do I do? So I'm listening out there and I'm like, you know what? I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
What the hell do I do now? Because I feel like I got to carry this all on my shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the first thing is find someone to talk to, right? You're not going to change your culture single-handedly within your company. I think the companies that will show up in this pandemic are the ones that really do demonstrate that they care about their people and they're doing more for them.
Yeah,
that's going to breed loyalty, hands
Right.
down. But as an individual employee, you can't sit there and expect your company to change. You can certainly champion change if you have the energy, or you can just focus on what can I do for myself. And that is, like you were saying, find someone to confide in, talk to. Could be a friend at first, and then it could be that maybe you find a coach or a clinician to talk to.
Right.
But you got to take care of yourself. You can't, then if you take care of yourself, then you can take care of your family. It's the old oxygen mask. Take
Right.
care
I was just
of
thinking
yourself.
of that analogy. Or it's like, that's why we're vaccinating the frontline workers, because we got to make sure they're healthy so they take care of all of us. Yeah. I think you can't, I mean, people probably are inclined to, hey, I can help everybody, but you got to fix yourself first, because you're just going to go down the wrong path.
I think mentors are very important too, Michelle. So I think of like the change of a leader to a mentor. So over the course of my life, I've had tremendous mentors, bosses from 15, 20 years ago that I could still speak to and have a conversation with about what I'm working on today.
Right.
Kind of surrounding myself with people like that helps me kind of really stay, above water a lot of the times, but it also allows me to kind of interchange ideas. A lot of employees don't have the ability to feel that their ideas are being shared. I've led some pretty big teams, and I've gone in and in the management structure, and I've heard, like, I've had conversations one-on-ones. It's like, oh, I had this idea, and well, why haven't you brought it up before? It didn't feel like it was fostered to do that. And that's one of the things that I felt like was really a detriment to a lot of the cultures I saw, was that they weren't fostering those idea exchanges and allowing people to kind of express what they were thinking. Because most of the times, from what I've seen, a lot of those great ideas don't come from great leaders. They come from the people down below them.
Right.
And really kind of fizzle off.
It's funny. I just met with someone from the UK, just a new connection. And he said to me, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And I wrote it down because I love that.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
Like, if you're not being acknowledged or appreciated where you are and you don't feel supported.
But some of us don't, sometimes we don't have a choice, though. It's
an opportunity. I mean, so you have to live.
We got a job. We got to go and deal with the crap.
But if it's at the expense of your mental health, I would argue.
I would argue too. And definitely being a leader versus a mentor versus a person on the other end is a different skill. And there's plenty of people that run businesses and lead, let's use the word lead units, because that's their job, are not really leaders. I mean, Trevor and I have had this conversation. I think Mike and I have separately too. Yeah. And you and I did when we talked. It is like, that's why they call it a dictator. Like, a dictator dictates things and says, hey, do this, do that, without any regard for the people. But a leader gets the people feeling good about what they're deciding to do and moving forward. And I think that may help with mental health too.
No, and I think too, Trevor, it's a great point talking about mentors, right? Because and then going back to, Michelle, what you said about awareness, if you have that awareness out there and it comes from the leadership, that kind of now trickles to the mentors, right? That basically are the ones that are a different role, right? In regards to where other people are going to, right? To get some guidance on. And they have the awareness that, and they're engaged that if you have issues, there are resources out there. So they do know that, and I think that the more awareness there is, the better off it is, right? Because now people know if they have an issue, they have a place to go, right? Because a lot of people, to your point, don't know that they have a place to go, or they don't, they just keep moving along, right? And I think it kind of stems down from, to your point, the leadership down to everyone else, the mentors and everything else.
Exactly. I have to talk about the role of leadership. I mean, I have on my website, I have 5 steps to creating a culture of compassion, because that's really what we need for people of all abilities, is to have that culture. But I think leaders underestimate the tone that they can set by going first. I mean, I worked in organizations where a leader had no problem sharing, I dealt with anxiety, or I dealt with depression, or a few years ago, this is what happened to me, and I made it through. They don't realize that they set the tone for the culture, and they actually represent hope, that if you can navigate it and get to the other side, that maybe
Right.
I could do the same.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a huge role when we talk about mental health and the environment, in what leaders can actually do by going first.
Yeah. Well, what do you do if you're a solopreneur or a small business owner
Yes.
and you're really working kind of on your own, maybe with a virtual support, like all of us kind of are? I'm
Yep.
at home, and that's my phone. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, what do you do there? I'm a big advocate of the use of advisory boards and mentors and things
Yeah.
like that for small business owners. But yeah, I think that it's
Support
difficult.
circle. Yeah, it's a support circle, right? It's who you is in your immediate support circle that you can talk to, right? It's the ones that you trust, and it could be your advisory board. It could be,
Just
um,
mentors. Yeah.
right. It could be, but you have to have one. You can't.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy. Listen, I came from big corporate America. I was very cozy. I had a lot of people in my community, and then I'm now an entrepreneur, brand spanking new, and I have to create that support circle. Otherwise, I think I would lose my mind. So it's so important to have a community of support,
Right.
especially as an entrepreneur. I just recently threw back up the post that I did last year about the risks of mental health for entrepreneurs and things they can do to stay mentally well. Because there's a whole different complexity around being alone and isolated.
But you
You
got
know?
to be affirmative about it, right? Don't just sit around until you have a problem and say,
I
well,
know.
who am
Yeah.
I going to call? You
I
got to have
know.
people you like, check-ins, I call them. There's certain
Yeah.
people that I check in with all the time. I checked in with my roommate from college last night and talked to him in about 4 or 5 months because there were things going on with his children and there's things going on in my world. And I have certain people that I check in with. And I think you need to do that, not systematically, but certainly proactively,
Yeah.
as opposed to waiting till
Yeah.
there's a problem. Maybe it's not your problem. Maybe it's just the person you're checking in with. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Never underestimate the power of checking in and asking people how they're doing, because you might see on the surface that they're doing fine, and you could be the only person that actually genuinely asks how you are doing, and
Right.
they need to hear from you. I mean, if we're talking about suicide, people go forgotten, and that's why they,
Yeah, they lose perspective.
exactly. So
Yeah.
don't forget the people in your life.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's definitely good advice. And I think that as solopreneurs, we, I mean, that's how you have to do it. You got to kind of build your own world,
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
world.
And I think, Mitch, you bring up a good point talking about, solopreneurs or small business owners for that matter. And this is very relatable to other dialogue that we've had in the past in regards to having that board, because, how many small business owners are out there just day to day, just making decisions off the hip, basically saying, okay, they didn't really bounce it off anyone, or they felt that they had someone to bounce it off of and just made decisions. And I think that relates to many different other things as well, right? Just by talking to, maybe you're going to make the same decision regardless, but especially now with how many things are changing in business in general, right? In regards to some of the trends that we've seen in the past weeks and months, I mean, we would have been here maybe anyway over the next 20 years, but it just all happened very quickly. So, depending on what business that you're in, whether you're thriving through this or you're suffering, a lot of things have changed, right? So, having that sounding board, to your point, I think is, and I think it's relatable to a lot of other things kind of related to what we're talking about here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I was
Michelle.
just going to add in real quick. I had a friend who was an entrepreneur long before I was reach out to me because they were struggling. So never underestimate the power of just checking in and asking how you're doing, because it could be that moment that someone goes, that guy always reached out to me. I'm just going to reach back out to him and take him up on his offer. Because I always try to extend myself, but you never know. Like, I thought that guy had his whole life together and everything was great.
Yep.
And he reached
Yep.
out and was like, I'm dealing with depression. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk. So
Yeah.
don't underestimate the power of even just checking in. Even if people say they're fine, they might come back around and say, I feel like I could trust you.
Trevor?
Sure. Question. So proactively, so you're a small business owner, you have a couple people within inside your immediate circle. What's some kind of steps that they can take to seek out, we talk about mentors, leaders, outside, obviously a lot of us have wider networks. Michelle, I'm like you. So I was in corporate my entire life and had to build my network almost from scratch, with the exception of the people with inside the industry.
Right.
And it was daunting at first. It was, checking in, meeting people and understanding, but then it started to connect. It took me a little bit, but I still fell back to like those core mentors that I've always had. And I always say, if I could lend out my mentors to people, I mean, these people have just transformed my life completely from top to bottom, but I don't know how to do that. So for people that may be seeking that, maybe it's a benefit to kind of give some tools and tricks to kind of, hey, listen, let me call Mike Manella. Let me reach out to him, and what he does. Because Mike's a tremendous person. He helps me with a ton of stuff, and we go by tons of stuff like all the time, but maybe they don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to build your network and to focus on really getting to know your, I mean, like, I think we're also focused on broadening our network as wide as possible, but it's also about having that tight network of a sense of community, a sense of trust with a tight group of people. And we have to do that. And we're not going to find those people overnight. It takes work. I know for me, I mean, I took advantage of a lot of opportunities to network. Mitch invited me to a few. I also did other things to build that up. But then I always had my core people, like you said. You need that. You need those core people that have the history with you, that know what you've been through and know what you're capable of in those moments where you're feeling really low and really crappy. Like, you need that one who's like, I have seen you 10 years ago and where you've come and where you are. And like, let's just keep it real.
Perspective.
Yeah. You need a variety of that, but you need that someone that you can connect with, because talking is everything when you're struggling. When you come out of your head and you verbalize how you're doing, it's almost like you diffuse the monster in your mind. And that's just so important.
Yeah,
So
it's always bigger. It's always smaller than we think it is, right?
Gosh,
I mean, it's it really is. And I think that's a good advice for people. They should put together in their mind, like, who it is that they can confide in and who can they be a resource in reverse. Like, I remember when you, me, and Mario, who's a good friend of ours, had lunch, and I was at like a crossroads with my firm, and you were like, yeah, I'm at a crossroads with my career too. This is before you really got started with all this stuff. And you said, this is what I want to do. And we all kind of talked it out. And I remember within weeks, a lot of things happened in both of our lives that were very quick. You're like, wow, that was quick. And you're like, well, you got me thinking, and it was more comfortable. And we tend to do things when we feel like we're not alone, because we always, I mean, our mind is just terrible it does not do us well when we think about things. We just really kind of sabotage ourselves.
Here's another nugget I want to leave your audience with. And I say this because I learned to do this before I had my diagnosis of depression. I found myself a therapist before I needed my therapist. Right? Because it's so much harder to find a therapist when you're in crisis. Right. So just go find yourself a therapist and build a rapport with them and be like, listen, I want you in my pocket. God forbid something comes along. Right. Because you're clearer. Your mind is clearer at that point to find the right fit. A lot of times people get discouraged with finding a therapist because like they try one, it doesn't work. And they're like, that person had no clue. And they give up. And so find yourself a therapist before you need it. God forbid you need it. And then you know exactly who you're going to, and they have a rapport with you.
Right. Well, you may find that you enjoy talking to them before you're in crisis.
Absolutely.
It'll avoid that,
Maybe. Yeah.
Right. Well, there's a stigma to it. We always think of mental health, going to a therapist because you have problems, this and that. And sometimes just being able to talk to people makes a huge difference. So it's all good advice. I don't know where we're going now with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
you
And
know.
I think that's a great point too, Michelle, too, is that it doesn't have to be a crisis, to have conversations, because everyday life, right? There's things that are happening in everyday life. Just to talk about them, is, it really will help you through it, just based upon the example, Mitch, you just gave, right? That conversation that you had, just the three of you, right? And in regards to what happened just from that overall, it helped you get perspective, on things. And you helped each other, in that overall conversation. So I think, to your point, doesn't have to be a crisis in order to have a conversation with someone, so it could be very helpful.
Right. And it's also to think about biases too. I mean, we all grow up in homes that affect how we view life, right? We all have our own biases. I mean, I could talk to any one of my friends and they all have a different perspective on mental health, and it's all shaped by how they were raised. So I think we also have a role to play when it comes to our children, when it comes to our loved ones, in normalizing the conversation about mental health. If you go first and you sort of, well, if you reflect and say, how do I relate to my own mental health? Or is mental health a school shooting, God forbid? Or is mental health someone's having just a challenge with their life? Like, understand your own biases and how you're showing up and how you're affecting other people, because that could either set the tone for a safe place for someone to talk to you, or from I'm not going to go and talk to them because I know how they feel about this. So it's also an opportunity to reflect and also role model what it looks like to have a healthy relationship to the brain, and even model good mental health hygiene, right? Like, for our kids, for us to be talking about our mental health, we model good mental health hygiene for them to be able to do that, so we have a really important role in removing stigma so more people get care.
Right. Well, I think the problem comes from, it's not like the older generations didn't have these problems. We were just taught not to talk about them, or, you got some issue going on and you're like, well, I got
Area.
ADHD, and they say that runs in the family.
Yeah,
And
runs.
say, well, my dad or my grandfather never had that. Well, maybe they did, but
Yeah.
totally didn't pay attention to it. It was like, suck it up, you'll be fine. He's a slow reader, all those things that they would say, even in school, with no resources to support these kids. I'm sure I was, mildly dyslexic in school. I would read things 14 times, same line, same page, and I still kind of do that. But there were no resources. Resources were, you go to the reading teacher and you get extra time. I was the last kid to finish. Nowadays, they support you. They set up a plan. The teachers sign on to it. There's more consciousness. And I think that's the hardest part. We're like stuck in this generation where we grew up without a lot of support, and more so like, well, he's a little slow or whatever, coming out of the generation before. Now our next generation is more like aware, because we're the parents that said, hey, something's wrong here. This is not right. And there was more intervention. And I think we're kind of making that transition. Hopefully generations to come will start from the right place, as opposed to letting it get out of gas. This is my soapbox comment.
Yeah. I have hope that this pandemic is actually pushing us in the right direction to normalizing mental health. Just because, if you look at the statistics from the CDC says that because of the pandemic, 1 in 3 are either dealing with depression or anxiety. So 1 in 3, if you look around, you're like, wow, that's really a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And chances are, there could be leaders who are affected.
For
And once
sure.
you're affected, then you're vested. So then you're kind of like, well, how many other people are struggling? So I'm hopeful the pandemic is actually elevating this conversation and removing some of the stigma.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking what, 350 million people in the country? Maybe the workforce is 200 million. I don't know. So that's like 60 million, 70 million people, something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Yeah. And some of them are, and I guess it's not just the workforce, right? It's our children too.
Yeah.
So it could be a lot more than that. It could be 100 million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is all valuable and good stuff. And I hope that, well, I hope we don't get 18 inches of snow tomorrow. That's what I hope. But, I do hope, I hope things start like melting away a little bit. You get a shot in your arm, you feel a little bit more comfortable, you're still doing the right things. And we'll see going into the spring. I mean, I still have groups that meet. They're like, well, we're not going to even consider meeting in person till June.
Yeah.
So, and employers that are not even going back for 2021, maybe next fall.
Yeah.
And people are dealing with stuff. But I think these are important discussions to have. And I thank you for not only the mental awareness that you've brought to me, but all the stuff you're doing on Conversations with Michelle. If anybody's listening to this, watching this, you can find Conversations with Michelle on Facebook, right? Or LinkedIn?
Yeah, well, I have a YouTube channel.
Okay, good.
But you can check me out collectively on my website, which is michelledickinson.com. My links to all my social media are on that page. But
Good.
yeah, I'm doing the Michelle's Conversations That Matter to really elevate different kinds of topics with experts and with people who have lived experience around mental health. So yeah.
Oh, so it's Michelle's Conversations That Matter. It's not Conversations with Michelle. I always say that backwards.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the entrepreneur by accident. It's the accidental entrepreneur. So, any final comments or questions, guys, for Michelle?
No, I think just a tremendous insight today, Michelle. I think I took away a lot, and I appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I want to say the same thing. Thank you so much for coming on. I think that you're providing just an invaluable service. I'd say the one last question I have is, how do we get a company in front of you, right? Like, what's the best way to make that introduction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, an organization that wants to be doing more for their people. Just have a conversation with me, and I can share with you a little bit about the assessment. You can get some insights into how to support your people. There's really some simple things you can do to just tune up what you're already doing. You're probably already doing stuff. Let's just tune it up. So introductions, I'm always open to just a discovery conversation. I'm happy to share what I offer.
And they can connect with you on LinkedIn, right? They can go to your website, learn about your book and your history and your story, right?
For sure.
Is your book available where? On Amazon?
Yeah, my book's available on Amazon. It's Breaking Into My Life.
Very good.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's very helpful, because I mean, the numbers that you just shared with us are staggering. So I can't imagine any company that we're talking to that is not having some of these issues, within their company.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So guys, this is another episode of Business Talk After Hours. Michelle, thanks for joining us. I'm Mitch Beinhacker, along with my good friend Trevor Anderson and Mike Manella. And we'll probably see everyone after the new year. I wish everybody the end of 2020. Let's put that one in the rearview mirror and look forward to 2021. Happy holidays to everyone.
Thanks.
Happy holidays.
Thank you for